This distributed firewall runs inside the hypervisor kernel. That is why it is called a distributed firewall. So in our previous classes, we discussed about distributed router, right? Similar to that, and distributed firewall module would get executed on the ESXi servers when you enable distributed firewall at NSX level. Now let's try to answer an important question like where does the distributed firewall run? Let's try to understand this from the architecture perspective. So many people think it runs as an virtual appliance. Something, some think it runs on the NSX manager, but that is not correct. Let's look at this diagram. Okay, at the top you can see NSX manager. So NSX manager belongs to the management. What is its job? Its job is configuration. It does not inspect traffic. It does not enforce firewall rules. It simply pushes that policies down to the transport nodes. Now next you can see that control plane, the central control plane. The central control plane distributes routing information and firewall rules. Again, it is not going to inspect any packets. It is going to distribute instructions. Now look at the bottom. You see something called transport node. ESXi, it might be an ESXi or it might be your KVM. Okay, so this is where the real action happens. Inside the ESXi host, you have a kernel space, and inside the kernel space, you see something called firewall kernel module. This is the actual distributed firewall. This distributed firewall runs inside the hypervisor kernel of every transport node. Okay, that is not in NSX manager or not in Edge, and it is not a virtual machine. Okay, so inside the ESXi kernel itself, it is running as a module. Its name is firewall kernel module. Now let's look at the VM on the left side. We can see something called firewall filter, which is attached to the virtual NIC, right? That means when a virtual machine sends traffic, the packet hits the firewall filter immediately before the packet leaves the host, reaches another VM or goes to the edge. This packet is inspected locally inside the ESXi where the virtual machine is running. So what is inside, what exists inside this kernel? So inside that kernel space, the firewall module maintains context table, flow table, rule table, and then address set. These are the internal data structures. Okay, so when a packet comes in, first it checks the context, then it checks the flow, then the rule table, and finally the address set. Okay, after that a decision is made instantly for that particular traffic, whether to allow or drop. This completely happens at the kernel level, and how quickly it's going to process it. It depends on the speed of the kernel. Now, each ESXi host which is part of that particular cluster, for example, if I have 10 hosts, then we'll be having 10 firewall enforcement points. If we add more hosts, then firewall capacity automatically increases. That is one of the beauty of this distributed firewall. Okay, so to summarize this architectural understanding, NSX manager is for configuration, control plane, distributed rules, but actual firewall enforcement happens inside the ESXi kernel in the firewall kernel module, which is attached directly to the VM's NIC. That is why this is called as distributed firewall. Okay, so any doubts on this one?
Sir, can we install this distributed firewall separately without NSX?
No. Normally,
No, right?
this firewall
Mhm.
kernel module will be installed during that host preparation.
Okay.
Do you remember before we
Yes,
start
yes.
that logical switching
When we,
class, we did the host preparation, right?
yes, yes, sir.
During that time period, this firewall related module, logical switching module, routing module, all this module get installed in the ESXi server. This software is responsible for firewall filtering.
Mm.
Okay, so wherever the segment we attach to that VM, so through that segment, it will flow that module, right? Firewall filter.
How we are saying? Through the?
Through that NIC card.
Mm,
So we are attaching the segment NIC, right?
mm.
As a port group. From ESXi to through that port group, it will filter on that port group level and it will go to VM.
Okay, so see the diagram here. Before it reaches that distributed switch, it is checking that firewall option, right? Are you able to
Yeah,
see that?
yeah. In kernel module itself, it is.
Yeah. So there is a firewall filter option which will be there. Okay, I'll show you later in our class. If you go to the ESXi server, you can find out that firewall filter option. I'll show you in the command line where it is exactly located so that you can understand. Okay, don't take a
Okay, sir.
decision. This firewall is applying at the segment level as of now. It's too early to decide. Okay, let's
Okay,
explore
sir.
this class and then you will understand where exactly this is getting applied. Because if you
Okay,
keep
sir.
an assumption that it is applying at the segment level, that will create a confusion later. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, sir.
Okay. So we'll move on. So what type of traffic does this distributed firewall is going to control? Distributed firewall controls VM to VM traffic inside the data center. For example, if we have application server and database server, and if we have web server and application server, this traffic never leaves a host or a cluster, right? Because this is VM to VM communication. And this distributed firewall secures it locally. There is no hairpin, no external firewall required here, to manage security on those virtual machines from an NSX perspective. Now let's talk about the gateway firewall. Gateway firewall runs on the NSX edge node. In the previous slide, we discussed about distributed firewall, where I told you distributed firewall will be runs on the ESXi nodes. So here gateway firewall runs on the NSX edge nodes. It is attached to tier 0 or tier 1 gateways, whereas distributed firewall attached very closely to my VMs. Here this is attached to tier 0 or tier 1 gateways. So now let's try to understand what kind of traffic does it protect. So this is primarily focusing on north-south traffic. So if you want to want to understand very clearly, traffic entering or leaving the data center. Okay, from the physical network, if there is a traffic which is entering into the NSX network or if it is going outside the NSX network, that will be handled by this gateway firewall. For example, internet traffic coming to your web server or a VM reaching out to an external network or in a branch office which is connecting to your data center, all the traffic passes through the NSX edge, and that is where gateway firewall policies are enforced. Okay, so think of like this. Distributed firewall protects traffic inside the data center. Gateway firewall protects traffic at the boundary of the data center. Okay, so this is how we can understand the difference between our distributed firewall and gateway firewall. So we'll move next. Let's focus on the distributed firewall in NSX Manager first, and then we'll move on to the gateway firewall menu options in NSX Manager. So once I click that distributed firewall menu on the NSX Manager, you can see we are presented with the screen with the distributed firewall, and you can see 4 tabs here: all rules, category specific rules, saved drafts, settings. Okay, so we'll go one by one. Okay, now let's start with the first one, all rules. What exactly is this all rules tab? Okay, this tab gives a consolidated view of every distributed firewall rule in the system. It doesn't matter whether the rule belongs to layer 2 infrastructure or application category. Everything is visible here in one place. Okay, so think of this as a master view. If you want to quickly see what security policies are active in your environment, this is where we come and explore the options. So this is like a dashboard for firewall. Now look at the screen. You can see multiple sections like default layer 2 section, default malicious IP block, default layer 3 section. These are not random sections, okay, and each category represents a different stage of traffic inspection. You can also notice something important at the